like and subscribe. Serious, when was a time you seriously feared for your life? You can go into detail if you like, but you don't have to if you don't wish to. Edit. I didn't expect this kind of response. I usually only get about 13 replies on my posts. We made it to a high of #4 on the hot page. I woke up when I was about 7. I heard some glass break downstairs. I grabbed my pocket knife that my brother gave me. Parents didn't know. I laid in bed with it held tightly to my chest. I saw the door open and threw the knife at the intruder. It hits my dad square in the face. Luckily, the knife part wasn't even out yet. He tells me that the storm shattered our table outside on the porch. I didn't sleep at all that night. How did your dad feel about that? I can imagine going to comfort your child during a storm, opening the door, and bam, knife to the face, would be a little terrifying. I was in China. We went to visit Huangshan, a beautiful mountain that has a lot of tourists flocking to it. Basically took a train there, then when we got off the train, a bus tout was trying to get tourists to take her bus to the mountain itself. This sort of thing is very common in China, and since we didn't have a plan for getting there, and they weren't asking too much, we followed her to her bus. Unfortunately, when we got on, there was only ourselves, me and my G/F at the time, and a Chinese couple, and about 10 empty seats. We knew this meant we weren't leaving until the girl had managed to fill most of the other seats. While we were waiting though, we saw the girl screaming and yelling at another girl who was doing the same job, but obviously taking tourists to a different bus. The screaming match soon came to physical blows, and after landing a particularly nasty punch, our girl ran back to the bus and hastily told our driver something, then smiled at all of us and told us we'd be leaving. The bus driver started the engine, and we left that train car park pretty quick. As we are driving, the bus driver gets a call on his mobile phone and has some kind of shouting match with the person on the other end. Soon, a bunch of cars surround the bus and basically force it off the road. We are sitting in the back wondering what kind of criminals run these tour buses and just what we are in for, as 3 carloads of Chinese guys get out of the cars. Well, the bus driver opens the door and starts yelling at these guys, when one of them steps onto the bus and physically drags the driver outside and throws him to the ground. There are probably 9 of these guys now surrounding the bus driver, and they start beating him and kicking him while he lies there on the ground. They are going to town on this guy, and we can just sit there horrified. None of us dare get a camera out to photograph this. Then, as I watch, one of the assailants picks up a huge rock, like a mini boulder, from the side of the road, and lifts it over his head. I'm sitting there looking at the size of this rock, and thinking I'm about to be the witness to a gang murder, and they aren't going to let me live to tell the tale. I just watch, mesmerized as this rock-wielding thug gets closer and closer to the guy, ready to smash his brains out. The driver is saved at the last moment as one of the other guys notices his buddy's intentions, and quickly grabs him and stops him. Obviously orders are to beat the guy, not kill him. The next thing I notice, as the beating starts to slow down a little, is the flashing lights of a police car. Now I'm thinking that 1 or 2 cops are going to struggle to deal with the number of guys beating up on the driver. The cops get out of their car, walk over to the group, pick up the bus driver, and put cuffs on him, and take him to their car and drive off with him. I'm beyond thinking straight at this point. WTF is going on here? Oh, I forgot to mention the girl. She got out of the bus when the driver was dragged out, and was screaming and hitting and kicking out at the guys beating him up, until one of them grabbed her and dragged her away. By now I've lost track of her. So, the next thing, the back door of the bus is opened, and in steps an extremely well-dressed Chinese man, in a black suit. He sits down, so he can talk to us from a nearby seat. He smiles and begins by apologizing profusely in perfect English for what we just saw. He offers to personally take us to the hotel we had planned to stay at the base of the mountain for the night, in his own private car, and all he asks in return is we pay him the amount we agreed to pay for the bus you usually pay when you get off. No extra for being taken in his luxury sedan. We did not say no. He chatted to us the whole way in very good English, as his driver took us where we wanted to go. TL, Dr. Bus driver in China, dragged out of bus and beaten and almost murdered in front of us. Then politely spoken to by possible triad leader, and driven in his personal luxury car. Back in 2011 I was at the Utøya summer camp in Norway. My group was sitting around a friend's travel radio, waiting to hear the police press conference on the bomb that had gone off a few hours earlier in Oslo. Then the loud popping started. People came running over the hill, and my first thought was some sort of crowd panic overreaction, but the look on the face of one person who jumped straight through the bushes made me realize he'd seen something. We decided to move away from the main campsite just to be safe, and headed for a nearby cabin. Halfway there we ended up going into a crouched sprint as the pops became very clear bangs that came ever closer. I would probably have run to the waterside and thrown myself into the lake, if not for the aid workers calling us into the cabin. I immediately thought that I was simply being trapped like a rat, but crowd instinct and spontaneous decision making was too strong in the heat of the moment. Quite a lot of clutter inside the cabin, as almost 50 people sought refuge there. I jumped into an empty room and tried to gain control over my breathing, while brainstorming possibilities of what was going on. An unspecified amount of minutes later a girl came into the cabin, and immediately started screaming, "He is going to kill us." At the time I was simply knee-jerk angry at the pointless screaming, but she was then herded into my room by two of the aid workers, and it's clear she was bleeding from the arm. Nothing outwardly grotesque, but it was the final nail in the coffin of any doubt I had about the scenario I was in. As the shooting was heard coming closer I had to seek refuge under a bed that was too small, and then had one of the aid workers squeezed in next to me, essentially trapping me for the next 2 hours with not enough space to move my arms, and with the bunk bed squeezing down on my ribcage. Those hours are kind of a blur. A lot of time to think, speculate, listen. The height of fear came when the gunman tried to open the door, and then shot 2 rounds through the door's glass window. For 1 second there I was resigned to death. Then nothing happened. Probably the worst thing was hearing screaming some 30 to 40 meters from the cabin, which I later realized was pretty much the dying screams of some people who had stayed at the waterside and not jumped into the lake. I don't remember what the scream was like at all. I only remember that I remembered it, so to speak. My mind has twisted it beyond all recognition, rendering it incapable of harming me emotionally. It was hell in the immediate aftermath of safety, though, as the screams repeated themselves dozens of times in my head uncontrollably for a few minutes. But yeah, scary stuff. And this is the *HEAVILYADRIDGED* version of the experience. And don't worry, I'm one of the relatively lucky ones. I never saw any dead bodies, never saw someone die, was dry and indoors for most of the experience, and lost nobody close to me. And like I mentioned, even the most traumatizing part for me has been twisted by my own memory into becoming unrecognizable and harmless. I don't struggle with night terrors and lack of sleep anymore, and only have occasional pangs of paranoia, but nothing crippling. Feel free to ask anything. The event has been relived in my head, and retold so many times, that I can easily chat about it even in casual conversation. No need for cautious steps outside of normal civility. Drunk guy on the side of the street said he was gonna kill me, and chased me until he tripped. I was 12. Just last month I was walking home from my favorite bar in Syracuse. My 2 best buddies who I knew since first week of freshman year were with me, and we were celebrating the climatic end of our college careers. While already a bit boozed up, I still had razor sharp memory of happened next. 2 guys drove up to us, each of them brandishing a handgun. They said not a thing and opened fire. Got hit once in the neck, twice in the chest, and twice in the leg. By paintballs. You heard me. The twisted thing is that I didn't immediately notice, what with the shock and all, and the fact that the paintballs were red. So for about 6 seconds or so, I thought I was going to end college bleeding out on the sidewalk. Best part was my friend just started chuckling, as if it weren't much a howdy do. Edit, it was near Euclid RV for those fellow Central New Yorkers asking. Never come back from Fegans alone, ha. My friend had something similar happen to him. We were walking along the sidewalk, and a kid walked up to him with his hands in his pockets. The kid pulled something out of his pocket, and we both saw a flash of metal, and heard the distinctive sound of a knife flicking open, as the kid began to raise his hand up towards my friend's chest. My friend was *very well trained in martial arts. He defensively grabbed the kid's wrist, and proceeded to shatter his arm and wrist. It was a switchblade hair comb. The kid was going to mug my friend as a joke. Instead, he permanently lost the use of his right arm. I was in Mexico, exploring an old abandoned resort. I notice an intact radio and flashlight charger on the table, both of which are on. I notice an extension cord going into another room providing them power. As any fellow urban explorers would know, coming across live power in a seemingly abandoned, secluded building is a bad sign. I leave the room immediately. As I turn to look over my shoulder, I see a man with a firearm sitting at the table that I was standing at literally 15 seconds ago. There are no words for how quickly I noped out of there. Was driving down the highway in a rental car on vacation with my dad. It was late. We were driving straight through to Florida. My dad was asleep in the passenger seat when the worst happened. At the time I didn't know what happened, but goes to find out my front left tire came off while we were going about 80 miles per hour. It started this slide to the left, where nothing I did slowed or altered my course, where ultimately, we slid down the left side of the highway into a culvert, but even that big concrete drain wasn't enough to slow us down. We kept on sliding right through oncoming traffic into the far side guardrail. As we were both injured, and knocked practically senseless from the multiple collisions, the culvert drain, and now this guardrail, we turned just in time to see the semi-truck coming right at us, air horn blaring. We thought it was over for both of us, for sure. Luckily, we had dented in the guardrail enough to where the back bumper was resting on the white line. The semi missed us. Never before or since have I ever been so close to death. And worse, it was something that was completely out of my control. There was nothing I could do, or could have done, to prevent it. Please tell me you sued the balls off the rental company? But aside from that, that's so scary. Glad you and dad made it through that. When did you realize that it was the wheel coming off that caused the accident, and what was the extent of your injuries, if you don't mind me asking? It was weird. I walked into my neighbor's house while he was on vacation. I was house sitting, 17 years old. I fed his cat, and I remember thinking, when I walked in, that I had slammed the door a little too hard. I opened the door to leave, and the instant I opened the door I just got swarmed by hornets. I got stung 26 times, almost all of the stings on my head and neck. I just ran back to my house, and I guess they didn't follow me far, because when I got inside they were gone. I was kind of freaked out, but I figured I'd be okay. My mom told me we should go to the hospital, but I was like, nah, I'll be fine. I decided to go take a shower, and while I was in the shower my back and chest started hurting. Got out of the shower, and walked in the living room feeling kind of dizzy and lightheaded. My mom took a look at me, and her jaw just dropped. She was like, get in the car now. Apparently while in the shower my whole head started swelling, and when she saw me I looked very different. She drove me to the hospital, which was maybe 2 blocks away, and during that 2 blocks I started losing consciousness, and not being able to breathe very well. I was pretty sure I was going to die. The last thing I remember was being put in a wheelchair right when I pulled up. Everything in my field of vision had a bright yellow tinge to it. I actually didn't get really scared. At one point I was just like, wow, I'm probably going to die. I'm just going to close my eyes and let it happen. So that's what I did. I came to in a hospital room a short time later. The doctor told me I had just barely made it. Crazy stuff. It's weird how scared of death I was / and how at peace I seemed to be with it when it actually came. I'm a 24-year-old manly dude and I have a disproportionate fear of flying insects that sting. Wasp, bees, hornets. I'll turn into that screaming girl in every fight video on Worldster. I was about 11 or 12, camping out in southern Oklahoma as a Boy Scout. Tent mate was asleep, and it was probably around 3 AM. I woke up. I heard something. It sounded like a bear. Deep throaty grunts, and it was moving around my tent. I froze. When you don't want to draw attention to yourself, you find it hard to even breath, because it makes too much noise in the dead of night. I stayed that way, frozen solid, barely breathing, for about 2 hours. It finally left, and I was able to fall asleep. Turns out in the morning, when I mentioned it, it was a dog from the campsite over. There are no bears in southern Oklahoma. Not that anybody was aware of anyhow. I was in my first motocross race and hit a jump too fast. I was 50 feet in the air, never done anything like this before, and I landed 90 feet down the track. I honestly thought I would die at 19 years old. Thankfully my stiff suspension absorbed the landing, and left me unharmed. I had intense jitters from adrenaline for the rest of the race. And with that added adrenaline I overcame everyone else, and lapped them all in my first race. Death road in Bolivia, going 50 km/h down a winding dirt road next to a 500-foot cliff. And I'm not at all an avid biker. At one point I was wobbling as I approached a turn. Proper brick was shat. In high school I worked at a used record/CD store near Little 5 Points in Atlanta, 1999 to 2000. From what I hear from friends still living in Atlanta, 5 Points has become a real bohemian neighborhood today, but 15 years ago it was just an artsy strip of dubious stores whose clerks sold drugs, guilty, to emo kids coming in from the suburbs, while being surrounded by poor drug-riddled neighborhoods all around it. Anyways, we would close and lock the doors at 10:30 PM, but wouldn't start asking people to leave until 11:30 or so, if they were still inside. We had a jam area where people could bring their guitars and other instruments and hang out and play if they wanted to. We had a regular, who to this day is still one of the creepiest guys I've ever met in my life. He was tall, always had a too big Cheshire cut, eating grin, and appeared to be jovial, but his eyes were hollow and dead. It's hard to explain, but I wasn't alone in being afraid of this guy for some reason. Several of the girls who worked in the store refused to interact with him, and one even told us he had followed her all the way home where she lived on the tech campus. Anyways, he comes in at closing time one night while I'm working alone, and proceeds to hang out at the counter running his mouth, and generally creeping the place out. I get everyone out of the store, close the register, lock the doors, and start walking down the street towards Highland Avenue where my brother worked, and would normally pick me up. Mr. Creepy corners me on the street on demands that I go get a beer with him. I try to blow him off, but he is insistent. Freakishly insistent. He swears he knows me, and wants me to drum in his stupid concept band, and I have to hear him out. I'm an 18-year hippie drummer kid at the time, and hadn't yet developed a confrontational bone in my body. I had one of my older brother's driver's licenses in my wallet. He was a duty student, which enabled me to get into and play at venues/bars, where an 18-year kid normally wouldn't be able to go. We head to a tight bar nearby, and he proceeds to horrify me with stories of prize fighting, stabbing, buying hookers, and brags how he is always carrying a gun, etc. All of this coming out of the mouth of a biracial dude who didn't look much older than me except for his dead eyes and creepy demeanor. Meanwhile, I've been pretending to play Snake on my old school Nokia brick phone, while pleading for someone to come get me. Thankfully, they do. Later, one of the bands I used to play in opens up for a stereotypically late 90s rock band named Cold at a venue called The Masquerade. Still there? We wrap up our set, and I'm out front trying to load my drums and my buddy's gear into my dad's truck, when guess who decides to show up? Mr. Deadeyes and his creepy personality. I'm pretty stoned at the time, tired, sweaty, trying to ride the remaining endorphin high that comes with performing, and generally in a jaff state of mind, and I completely blow him off. The very next night, I'm trying to close up shop with another one of the employees, who while being cool, was 30 at the time, lived in his mom's basement, and had these pastel colored tattoos all over his body that just screamed who would generally be worthless in a time of need. Shortly after locking the doors, we hear a knocking on the front doors. Thinking it may his girlfriend, Chris goes to unlock the doors. A moment later, Chris is yelling for me to come out front from the back. I wind my way through the display racks and tie band t-shirts on display to find Mr. Creepy standing there without his trademark smile, holding a revolver in his right hand, and demanding to know why we won't be his friends. We were able to convince him that we really did think he was cool, but we were just too busy with life to hang out, and finally convinced him to leave. He continued to come in from time to time, but I wound up quitting that job shortly after HS graduation to bartend in Florida with my brother for a year, before joining the Marine Corps shortly after September 11th. I'd like to say that was the only time I had a crazy person confront me with a gun, but the bar I worked at got held up 5 times while I working there. Having a crazy person pointing a gun at you never gets easier. Anyways, I know it's not too extreme, but that was the first time I legitimately felt in serious fear of my life. TL, Dr. Creepy Dude borderline stalks record store employees, confronts with gun to know why they won't be his friends. I think I'm late to the party, but 2 months ago, I interrupted a burglary in my own home. When I walked in the door, I was shot in the abdomen by one of the people robbing my home. I ran out of the house until my legs gave out. I tried to stay calm and pulled 911. Since I wasn't near the house, I continued to push the panic alarm on my car until the police found me. I was calm for most of the experience. I knew that if I got worked up, my heart rate would rise and I would bleed out. I was conscious until they put me under in the hospital. I wasn't worried I'd die from the loss of blood, but more worried I would suffocate. The bullet was near my diaphragm. It felt like breathing through a coffee straw. Over time, it got harder to breathe. I wasn't afraid of death, but wanted to survive, because my mom lost my dad a few months prior. I wanted to survive for her. She's an incredible woman, and doesn't deserve to bury 2 of her loved ones so soon. To this day, I still feel guilt for putting my mom through this. Edit, here's a post on Reddit about it. http://facebook/com/2zyke5/1_of_is_is_critical_condition/ I'm somewhat well known in my area because of a gif of me dancing. I think I was 10 or 11. I lived in a very tight area and got into a lot of fights as a kid. Lots of gangs and drug dealers. There was a crack house about a block from where I lived, and just about everyone there dealt drugs, including us kids. I also don't mean the play fighting/wrestling stuff, although we did that too amongst our group. Honestly though, it feels more like we were preparing ourselves for all the fights we did get into. I was chased off the school bus by a kid with an axe once, nearly got into a huge knife fight, all before I was a teenager. My parents were divorced, and I decided to go to my mom's one weekend. I normally didn't, since my mom had serious mental health issues, and I didn't fully understand them at the time. It made it hard for us to communicate, and it still does. I got into a fight with this kid, beat him up, and he went home crying. Later that night I was out with a friend of mine. I convinced him to come with me to my mom's that weekend. It was dark, and we were just running around the neighborhood being stupid. We saw a group of older teenagers, maybe 17 to 18 years old. They were in a small circle, and one of them saw us, and they immediately started running towards us. We both took off running. I was the only one that got caught. I was surrounded by them when one pulled out a gun, pulled back the trigger, and placed the barrel against my temple. I barely even heard the questions they were trying to ask me. In my mind it didn't matter what I said. I was about to die. After maybe 15 to 20 seconds, it sure as hell felt like longer, the barrel was pulled away, and they all laughed. One of them said I shouldn't with his little brother anymore. When they were walking away, one yelled, "The gun wasn't even loaded, you little." The friend that was with me was hiding underneath some bushes, and saw the whole thing. I'm surprised I made it back to my mother's apartment after that happened. I remember feeling like I couldn't breathe the whole walk back, trying to make sense of what the hell just happened, mind racing. The gun very well may not have been loaded. It doesn't change the experience of feeling a gun barrel pressed against your temple before you're even a teenager, thinking in any second you're about to die. Edit, format. Was involved in a car accident when I was 20. I was riding shotgun in a car of 4 people. The driver lost control of the car and plowed it into a concrete light pole at around 45 miles per hour. After the initial shock, I was able to get out of the car and start running from the wreck to a nearby firehouse. After 2 or 3 steps, my legs turned to jelly and eventually numb, and had no choice but to lie on my back covered in gasoline and oil watching the driver and my friend pulling my unconscious 4th friend out of the car. Edit, added speed. I was flying on one of those cheap European discount airlines into Paris and we flew into a massive electrical storm. How they didn't see this coming I have no idea. They got on and told us they couldn't land the plane in the storm and we would have to fly to another city. Then they realized they didn't have enough fuel to make it. So we had to land in the storm. Scariest hour of my life. Plane was thrown around like a toy. Flight attendants were crying. People praying. It was unbelievable. We did manage to land. The pilots got a standing ovation from the whole plane, and I have been severely phobic of flying ever since. Visiting my college bestie. We are hanging out in her apartment, watching anime, drinking tea. Life is good. I hear a clatter behind us, and see her roommate rummaging through a kitchen cabinet. She pulls out a large butcher knife, says something to the tune of "this should do it," and proceeds to go into the bathroom. Bestie was out on the patio talking to her boyfriend. I tell them this when they come back in. Bestie goes pale. This apparently is not new behavior with the roommate. Guy goes ahead and calls the cops. Bestie says she'll wait on the patio to look for them. The unit was hard to find, and the area layout was weird. I go towards the bathroom to see if I can hear anything, since they decided I'm the neutral party, and thus less likely to upset her. There's water running, and the girl is mumbling. I ask her she's about to shower, and if I could come in just for a second. I need some hair mask stuff. There was a second bathroom, so I needed a better excuse. You try to come in here and I will stab you. Guy is down the hall, looking ready to tackle if she does come charging at me. I spend the next 40 minutes. Cops decided we weren't super high priority, bad part of town, and hard to find anyhow, keeping up a stream of conversation with her, from the bathroom into her bedroom, at Niffer Point several times, with her swinging and jabbing at me. Cops came and put her under psych hold. I was basically waiting to get stabbed to death for about an hour. She was dangerous and absolutely sincere. If the guy had tried to intervene, she would have hurt me just on principle. Edited for clarity. Not as exciting as most of yours, but here you go. I was 14, and in the car with my father, who has borderline personality disorder and refuses treatment. Many people with BPD work there. Off to manage the disorder, so I don't mean to imply that his diagnosis justifies his actions or that everyone with BPD is like this. He wanted to go to the beach with me, but I said I didn't want to go. For whatever reason, he kept asking me over and over. Do you want to go to the beach? No. Do you want to go to the beach? No, I don't. Do you want to go to the beach? Why do you keep saying that? Do you want to go to the beach? No. It wasn't a playful thing, it was some kind of power trip that I still don't understand. After he asked about 7 times, I just stopped answering, and he snapped. He slammed the brakes, and came to a full stop in the middle of a major highway, which was terrifying. Then he turns to me, and starts screaming, that I'm an ungrateful, and all the stuff he screamed at me all the time, except I'm strapped in a car on the highway, and can't even try to get away. I'm just going, you're right, I'm so sorry, I'm a spoiled. I won't do it again. I'm so sorry, and he's screaming over me as cars swerve around us, and I don't know what to do, so I reach for my Nokia brick phone, to call 911 or my mum or something. and he knocks it out of my hand, and then takes his fist and starts slamming it down over the top of my head. No marks that way, but my ears are ringing, and as he goes to smash my head against the window, I think either I die here in the car or I jump out into traffic and die like that, and I'd rather have my death on my father's conscience than RSTRANGER''S*, so I just go limp, and get slammed around until my father calms down, drives me home, shoves me into the driveway, tells me not to tell my mother, and speeds away. And I tried not to tell her, but I couldn't help bursting into tears when I said hello, and then it all came spilling out of me, and changes were made, but not changes enough. My father is much better now, though. Age has calmed him a lot. Also I'm an adult now, so he can go himself. I was 11 or so, off school on Memorial Day break. I looked up from where my dad and I were watching TV, and noticed a white van in our driveway. No big deal, I figured they'd turn around. Only they didn't turn around. They were just sitting there. Dad, there's a car in the driveway and they're not turning around. My dad peered out the window, and I noticed the van was filled with men dressed in suits. My dad turned to my brother and I, nodding. Get in the bedroom, now. We sprinted down the hallway, diving into the master bedroom. Dad soon ducking in after us. They rang the doorbell. You could hear a pin drop. I urged my dad to get the guns out of the safe, but my dad simply shushed me. We didn't want them knowing we were home. A few minutes later my dad trekked outside of the room, and came back, tossing my brother a pamphlet and grinning. Didn't want to deal with them today, was all he said, before he went back to watching TV. My brother and I stared at the pamphlet, and realized it mother I'm Jehovah's Witnesses. This happened when I was 13 years old. I was playing Kirby's Epic Yarn when my young sister and I saw someone in our backyard in a hazmat-like suit carrying a hose. My younger sister and I were the only ones home. We ran upstairs when we saw him. We didn't have our own cell phones, but our parents did. There was a landline phone in my parents' room, so we ran into that room. Here's the problem, that phone could only send calls. It couldn't receive calls. We called our dad, and told him about what was happening. He told us that he would drive home, and that he would yell at the door when he was unlocking it, so that we didn't think it was the guy in our backyard, and he said to call the police if he, the guy in our backyard, tried to enter our house. I think my dad was unsure of the situation, and didn't know if the guy was supposed to be here or not. Remember, my dad couldn't call us back if he wanted to. My sister and I sat in his room, afraid of what would happen next. We didn't really speak much, since we were scared that we might die. I don't remember why, but I decided to call my dad again. He told us that after we called him, our mom called him, or he called our mom. And our mom told him that the exterminator would be coming to our house. That guy in our backyard wasn't a murderer. He was an exterminator. I feared for my life, and for my sister's life over an exterminator. So this one time, about 2 years ago during my 3rd year of college, I got blackout drunk. I was sleeping at a friend's house that night, and apparently woke up to relieve myself. In the hallway, which led to the bathroom, there was also a doorway that led to the basement. Now, I don't exactly remember the events exactly, but what I've put together is that I went running to the bathroom, pulled the door open, and flung myself towards the toilet. I flung myself down a flight of stairs into my friend's basement. I remember thinking to myself mid-flight, I'm gonna die. I also remember my head smacking the ground really hard, reaching up, feeling my head, and looking down at my hand covered in blood. The next thing I remember was waking up on my friend's couch covered in blood. Still alive, no concussion. I've got to admit, the image in my head of a drunk kid flinging themselves down the stairs is kinda hilarious. Glad you're okay, of course. I went in the woods with a guy I barely knew and ditched rooms. After a while the topic of murder came on, and I became paranoid that he was going to kill me. Had my whole life flash in front of my eyes. Might sound stupid, but I accidentally swallowed a large candy, and it got stuck in my throat. My friend was there to help me, but if I was alone I might have suffocated. Fell headfirst on a 20+ FT cliff, while hiking with friends. I fell near a rocky riverbank. I just felt my head colliding with a rock, and next thing I knew I was underwater, and could clearly see that the water near me turned red. I passed out. Woke up to my friend dragging me out of the water. I was looking to buy some wood flooring from a guy on Craigslist. He won't give me his address, but he gives me an intersection to meet him at about 5 miles into this wilderness. I meet him there, and he has me follow him down a dirt road. I quickly lose cell reception, and go a few miles without seeing any homes or people until 2 trucks appear behind me. I look on my GPS and there is no way to get back to a main road without turning around. After a while the road I'm on isn't even on my GPS. 1 truck stays back, but the one right behind me, riding my the guy I'm following finally turns down a long driveway and the 2 trucks continue on. We arrive at this cabin and the guy says, "I bet you were getting a little worried until those 2 trucks came up." I didn't tell him the trucks made me feel just the opposite of safe. You've been visited by the ghost of a very important man. Pay your respects by liking and subscribing, and he'll grant you 3 weeks of good luck.